Hello and welcome to Miniature Adventures. I'm Big Lee, and this week I want to ask, is big wargaming changing forever? Alright, so let's talk about something that's been rattling around in my head for quite a while now. In fact, today's talking point started as a question in the comments last year, I think it was, and it's been rattling around inside my empty head ever since. I'm afraid I didn't take a note down of who asked the original question, but whoever it was, I'm finally responding to you. So, looking at the tabletop wargaming hobby as it stands today, is it possible to spot those special products that act like weather vanes? You know, the things that point towards the future of the hobby. Not necessarily the games that are the biggest sellers right now, and not always the ones that win awards or dominate conversations on forums, but those products that tell you where things might be heading. They're like arrows showing which way the wind is blowing. And that's the idea that I want to explore today in today's video. So before we start digging into specific examples, let me just explain what I mean by a weather vane product. Imagine the old farmhouse, you know, with a metal rooster on top, and the rooster doesn't control the wind, but it does show you which way the breeze is going. In the same way, a weather vane product doesn't have to dominate the market. It doesn't have to be the game that everyone is playing right now. What makes it a weather vane is the influence it has. It's the way it shifts expectations or solves old problems or shows other designers and companies what's possible. Sometimes it's in hindsight, only in hindsight, that you realise a particular release was a weather vane. However, if you pay attention, you can sometimes catch them in real time, and that's what I'm hoping we can do today. So where are we right now in the wider hobby? When you zoom out, the last decade has been incredibly dynamic. We've seen a massive rise in skirmish games, games that don't require you to buy, build and paint 100 models before you can even get a game in. We've seen hybrid board games, board game war games rise up, often backed by huge entertainment licenses where you get everything you need in a single box. We've also seen digital technology creep more and more into how we play, you know, through apps or 3D printing or online rules updates. And of course, at the same time, the old guard is still here. You still see people wheeling their 28mm Napoleonics into the club in big plastic tubs. You still see folks lugging around their foam trays full of World War II tanks. The 6x4 table with two big painted armies is far from extinct. In fact, in some ways, it's thriving. So the hobby isn't replacing its old traditions so much as adding more options on top. That mix makes it tricky perhaps to figure out what the future will look like, but also really exciting. So let's dive into some examples of things that I think serve as true weather vanes. Now first up, let's get it out of the way because, you know, they loom so large in the industry. Games Workshop's skirmish titles like Kill Team and Warcry. Love them or hate them, you can't deny the signal they send. These games take the high quality plastic kits and the production values of Games Workshop it's famous for, but they present them in a format that's dramatically easier to get into. You only need a handful of models. You can paint up a kill team in a weekend. You can learn the rules in an evening. You can finish a game in a couple of hours. And the missions are often cinematic or narrative driven, giving you that feel of a story unfolding. So why does this matter? Because when a company as influential as Games Workshop puts its weight behind a format, it validates it in the eyes of the wider community. People who might never have touched a small scale skirmish game before are now happily playing Kill Team every week. Other companies notice and follow suit. So while Games Workshop didn't invent the skirmish format, their embracing of it is a big arrow on our weather vane pointing towards accessibility and narrative. Now let's swing over to Warlord Games and their Epic Battles series. Now these are games like Black Powder Epic Battles for the American Civil War or Napoleonics. At first glance they look like they're doing the opposite of Kill Team. Big battles, lots of models, rows upon rows of infantry. But what makes them a weather vane, I think, is the way that they lower the barrier to that kind of spectacle. The models are small enough that you can field massive armies without spending a fortune or needing a spare bedroom to store them. The sprues are cleverly designed so you can knock together a whole regiment in an evening. And the box sets are affordable enough that two people can split one and have everything they need to play. Now what that says to me is that even the more traditional corners of the hobby are thinking seriously about accessibility. There's an acknowledgement that while some players will always want 28mm regiments, others want the feeling of commanding a huge army without dedicating years of hobby time to it. Epic Battles shows us that scale, affordability and practicality are going to be part of the conversation going forwards, even in historical wargaming. Now it's time to talk about something that does really feel like a revolution brewing quietly in the sidelines. 3D printing subscriptions. You've probably seen these if you hang around on Patreon or My Mini Factory. Designers offering bundles of STL files each month for a modest fee. Sometimes it's fantasy goblins, sometimes it's historical ancients, sometimes it's entire ranges of terrain. What's happening here is a decentralisation of production. Instead of a handful of big companies controlling what's available, suddenly you have dozens or even hundreds of independent sculptors putting out high quality designs every month. Now I think this is a huge weather vane because it's changing not just what's on the table but how people think about ownership and collecting. Imagine a future where instead of waiting for a company to release the unit you want, you just download the STL and print it that night. Imagine being able to personalise your army with custom poses, gear and faces that no one else has. That kind of customisation is incredibly appealing. Now, not everyone has a 3D printer yet. Not everyone wants to tinker with resin vats or slicer software. But the direction is clear. More people are trying it every year and the models are getting better and easier to work with. Then there's the whole category of hybrid board game wargame crossovers. Think Marvel Crisis Protocol or Star Wars Shatterpoint. These are products where you get everything in one box. The rules, the templates, the dice, the miniatures. The models are dynamic, detailed and often pre-assembled or snap fit so you can start playing right away. And because they're tied to massive pop culture franchises, they bring in audiences who might never have thought of themselves as wargamers. Someone who loves Marvel movies might pick up Crisis Protocol and suddenly discover they enjoy painting miniatures. A Star Wars fan might grab Shatterpoint because they want to move Jedi around the table and then find themselves wandering into historicals or fantasy at a later date. That gateway effect is really important. For decades, Games Workshop served as the main funnel into the hobby. Now we're seeing those licensed games serving the same function. That could shape the future in a big way because it means the pipeline of new players might come from very different directions than it has done in the past. Finally, we need to talk about digital tools. I know, not everyone likes apps in their war games, but the truth is they're becoming part of the way many people play. Whether it's official army builders, online rules updates, digital campaign trackers, or even just YouTube battle reports, the digital layer is inseparable from the physical hobby now. The companies that figure out how to integrate that smoothly without making it intrusive or mandatory are probably the ones that will set the pace going forwards. So if you pull back and look at all of these examples together, what themes do we see? Well, for me, the biggest one is accessibility. Everything we've talked about is about lowering barriers. Skirmish games lower the time and money barrier. Epic Battles lowers the scale barrier. Hybrid IP games lower the intimidation barrier. 3D printing lowers the availability barrier. Digital tools lower the rules complexity barrier. Everywhere you look, the future is about making it easier to get involved. And the second big theme that I think I'm picking up on here is narrative. More and more players are being drawn into story-driven experiences rather than purely competitive ones. Campaigns, character progression, cinematic missions, all of these things are becoming central to new rule sets and hobby. People want their games to feel like stories, not just number crunching contests. The third theme is hybridisation. The lines between board games, role-playing games and war games are blurring. You've got board gamers dabbling in miniatures, you've got role players painting up figures, you've got war gamers buying big box games because they like the characters. The cross-pollination is creating a much more fluid hobby ecosystem. Fourth is customisation. 3D printing is empowering players to build unique armies and terrain that reflects their own creativity. That's a big shift away from the days when everyone's army looked more or less the same because everyone bought from the same catalogue. And finally, Digital integration is shaping how we consume rules, how we interact with communities and how we manage our collections. It doesn't mean dice and tape measures are going away, but it does mean that being purely analogue is increasingly rare these days. Now, before we get carried away, we need to recognise the difference between trends and fads. Not every flashy Kickstarter is the future. We've all seen games launched to huge excitement, piles of stretch goals and then vanish into obscurity. A true weathervane product is one that has influence beyond its own lifespan. Even if the game itself fades, the format or the ideas behind it ripple outwards. That's what we need to pay attention to. And let's not forget that old ways aren't disappearing, I'm glad to say. Big armies on big tables are still alive and well. Historical gamers are still happily digging into obscure conflicts with lovingly researched figures. Plenty of players still prefer rulebooks to apps. They like their metal miniatures instead of plastic or resin miniatures. The future isn't about replacing the past, it's about layering new options on top. So where does that leave us? Well, I'd say the weathervane products are telling us that the future of wargaming is diverse. It's not heading in one single direction. Instead, we've got multiple roads branching off. Some players will go deeper into digital and 3D printing, others will embrace hybrid board game crossovers, others will keep building traditional armies, but in more accessible scales. What unites all of these roads is a focus on flexibility and accessibility. And I honestly believe that's something to celebrate. It means there's room for everyone. Whether you want a quick skirmish in 20 minutes, a narrative campaign over several months, or a full recreation of Waterloo, there's going to be a product out there pointing you towards that experience. The weathervanes are showing us a hobby that is broadening, not narrowing, in my opinion. So that's my take. I think games like Kill Team, Epic Battles, 3D printing subscriptions, hybrid IP games, and digital tools are all pointing the way forwards. They're not the only things that matter and they don't erase what came before, but they're the clearest signs of where the winds are blowing. But as usual, I don't want this to be just about me talking. I want to know what you think. What do you see as the real weathervane products of the future? Do you agree with my analysis or do you see other trends pointing in different directions? As always, please drop your thoughts in the comments below because I really do love hearing your perspective. Just a short workbench update this week because I've run out of stuff to paint. Well, okay, that's not true, of course, but I haven't got any miniatures for the Retreat from Moscow project, aside from some plastic Ulans, and to be frank, I can't bring myself to paint them. Lovely as they are, the plastic just feels too flimsy to me. I'll probably break them before they've even finished being painted. Now, I am considering getting some metal Ulans at Partisan next week, but I think I just need to step back and see if my enthusiasm for plastic cavalry materialises. I am a bit of a metal snob, although I've painted plastics and resin miniatures for fantasy settings before. Maybe I need to make a video on this topic and explore why I have this prejudice against plastics in my historical armies. So the only painting that I've actually got completed this week was a handful of scatter terrain items using various bits of recycled MDF and materials I scavenged while in the park a few weeks ago. Once again, maybe I can make a video about free or cheap terrain that I've made over the years. Let me know in the comments if this is something you'd like to see explored in a future talking point video or maybe even a build tutorial. So that's it for this week. As always, please join the conversation in the comments below. And if you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe and share, and maybe consider becoming a member. And of course, if you want to keep up to date with weekly content from this channel, please tap the bell notification icon. So until next week, stay safe, keep gaming, and of course, keep rolling high.